Surprisingly, over 90% of viewers haven't subscribed yet. If you're enjoying the content, hit that subscribe button. It motivates us to keep creating and helps us never miss an upload. When Maya leaned back in her chair that evening, swirling her glass of wine as laughter echoed through the room, I didn't think much of it at first. She was always quick with a quip, always ready to make people laugh. That quality had drawn me to her years ago, back when I believed her sharp wit meant she was clever, not cruel. But as the conversation drifted toward hobbies and passions, I saw her eyes flicker toward me, mischief gleaming in the corners. She tilted her head, smiled at her friends, and delivered a line that felt like a knife disguised as a joke. "Oh, Jake, he's too boring. Always wants the quiet evenings, the predictable routines. You could set a clock by him." The table erupted with laughter. I forced a smile, though every chuckle around me pressed down like a weight on my chest. It wasn't the first time she had teased me in front of others, but this time it was different. I saw the way she relished the reaction, the way she leaned in as if to bask in the glow of her clever cruelty. My stomach tightened, but I didn't let it show. I simply nodded, took a sip of my drink, and sat back in silence, letting the noise of their amusement wash over me. That night, though, something shifted. What she thought was harmless banter was, in reality, the final crack that allowed something long buried inside me to stir. On the walk home, Maya didn't mention it. She slipped her hand into mine as if nothing had happened, her laughter still lingering on her lips. I stayed quiet, staring at the pavement beneath our feet. The city lights reflected in puddles from the earlier rain, and the sound of our shoes hitting the sidewalk filled the silence. By the time we reached the apartment, she had already forgotten the remark. I hadn't. The following weeks dragged on with the same rhythm. Work, dinners, friends, her jokes at my expense. But I was no longer just enduring. I was watching, listening, planning. She thought of me as predictable, but in her blindness, she failed to see that I had already begun mapping out something she would never anticipate. It started with small steps. I joined a public speaking club at the community center, telling Maya I was working late. Standing in front of strangers, my hands trembling at first, I forced myself to speak. Each session I grew steadier. My voice carried further, my words landed with more weight. Soon, I wasn't just practicing speeches. I was learning the art of commanding a room. The very thing she thought I lacked, presence, charisma, became the weapon I was sharpening in silence. I started reading every book I could find on storytelling, confidence, and performance. I watched videos of speakers holding audiences spellbound, pausing at just the right moment to let tension build. I practiced in front of a mirror until the man staring back no longer looked timid. Bit by bit, I reshaped myself, molding the quiet routines she mocked into deliberate preparation. Meanwhile, Maya carried on as if nothing had changed. Her social circle thrived on weekly gatherings, filled with wine, chatter, and her endless commentary. I attended when I had to, smiling politely, nodding along, keeping my thoughts guarded. She continued with her sly remarks, each one fueling the fire I carefully kept hidden. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger fades. What remained was colder, more focused. One night, as she laughed with her friends about some story from work, I quietly excused myself and went into the other room. Pulling out my laptop, I sent in an application to speak at a local charity event. It wasn't a grand stage, not yet, but it was an opportunity to step beyond practice and into performance. The confirmation email came a week later. I didn't tell Maya. As the day approached, I poured myself into preparation. Late nights were spent rehearsing every word, every pause, every subtle inflection. I pictured the crowd, their eyes on me, their attention locked. For the first time in years, I felt alive in a way that her approval could never give me. This wasn't about winning her back. This was about becoming someone who no longer needed her validation at all. The night of the event arrived, and I stood backstage, my heart pounding, but my voice steady. When they called my name, I stepped out into the light. Rows of faces stared back, curious, waiting. I began to speak, and within moments the room fell silent. Not with boredom, but with attention. I told a story of resilience, of transformation, of quiet strength often mistaken for weakness. I didn't mention Maya, but I didn't need to. Every sentence carried the weight of my journey. Every pause held the echo of the laughter that had once cut me down. By the time I finished, the applause filled the hall, rolling over me in waves. People stood, clapping, smiling, some with tears in their eyes. I bowed my head slightly, allowing myself a small smile. This was only the beginning. Over the next few months, I kept building. Invitations came, small conferences, community events, panels. Each stage was larger than the last, each crowd more responsive. I stayed disciplined, never boasting to Maya, never revealing the double life I had cultivated. To her, I was still the same quiet man, dependable and unassuming. To the world outside, I was becoming something else entirely. The irony was almost poetic. She spent her evenings scrolling through her phone, posting pictures from dinner parties, mocking others for their lack of excitement, unaware that the man she dismissed had been growing into someone unrecognizable. I didn't need to tell her. Time would. 6 months later, I stood in front of a packed auditorium, the largest stage yet. Cameras lined the back, recording every word, every gesture. As I looked out over the sea of faces, I felt no fear, only clarity. The lights dimmed slightly, the crowd hushed, and I began. Among the audience, I knew Maya was there. She hadn't come for me, not directly. She had been invited by a mutual friend who wanted to see the event. She sat near the middle, her expression casual at first, then slowly shifting as she realized what she was witnessing. I didn't falter. My voice filled the room, confident and sure, each word weaving a spell over the audience. I spoke of being underestimated, of rising above ridicule, of finding strength in silence. When I finished, the standing ovation was thunderous. I held my gaze on Maya just long enough to see her frozen, her mouth slightly open, the arrogance gone from her eyes. For the first time, she was the one without words, and in that moment, I felt no need to gloat, no urge to remind her of the night she had mocked me. The silence she sat in was enough. The morning after the auditorium, sunlight came through the blinds in pale stripes, and the apartment felt staged, like a showroom with our lives placed carefully on shelves. Maya brewed coffee, hands moving with practiced ease, but her eyes kept flicking toward me, as if waiting for a cue to rewind the night and edit it into something familiar. She set a mug near my notebook and hovered, searching for a tone that would let her pretend nothing had shifted. I thanked her and sat at the table. The silence between us wasn't angry, it was precise, it had edges now. "You didn't say you were speaking," she said, trying for casual and landing somewhere brittle. I didn't know." "You knew enough," I replied, not unkindly. "You saw it." Her mouth moved as if to form a joke, but she shut it again. The woman who could keep a party orbiting her had no gravity here. She took a sip of coffee, burned her lip a little, and set it down too quickly. I watched the surface ripple, a small storm in a ceramic sea. My phone had been buzzing since dawn. Messages from organizers, invitations to panels, a podcast request, a charity gala asking if I'd keynote. A clip from the event was already circulating online. The comments were generous. People spoke about the calm in my delivery, the way I held silence and made it feel like a promise. One message, though, stood apart. A friend of ours from those wine-soaked evenings sent a single line. She looked like she'd swallowed her own punchline. I didn't gloat. Gloating would have been loud, and my power had grown in quiet. I went for a run through the park, came back, showered, dressed, and opened my laptop. The work filled the space where resentment once lived. I wrote outlines, planned schedule blocks, responded to a dozen emails with measured yeses and careful no thank yous. Every reply felt like a brick in a foundation I should have poured years ago. Maya scrolled through her phone at the counter. Her thumb slowed, stopped. "They tagged you," she said, eyes barely above a whisper. "There's a lot." She met my gaze. "You were good." The word seemed a strain on its way out. "Thank you," I said. I waited for the sting, the reflexive jab she used when praise made her feel exposed. None arrived. She crossed her arms like she needed to hold herself together, and nodded once, small and reluctant. That afternoon, I met with a mentor from the public speaking club. He'd retired from a long career as a trial attorney and took pleasure in training people to speak with courage rather than volume. We sat at a narrow cafe table, the kind that wobbles unless you anchor it with a foot, and he asked me what the auditorium had taught me that the meetings hadn't. That I was waiting for permission I didn't need, I said. He grinned. There you go. Remember that line. But also remember this. Revenge that burns hot leaves ash. If you want something that lasts, build a life where you don't need to look over your shoulder to enjoy it. I carried those words home, tucked them beside the outline for my next talk. They were a compass. At dinner, Maya suggested we invite people over for Friday. To celebrate, she said, trying to sound natural. They'd want to toast your success. She tested the word like it might explode. No, I said, and let the syllable land without apology. I'm keeping the next few nights quiet. I've got prep to do. Her lower lip stiffened. Of course. The quiet nights. Your specialty. There it was. The old hook. The comfortable flinch. I didn't bite. You're not obligated to be here, I said gently. If you want noise, get it. I'm not curating your evenings. She stood, chair legs scraping tile. You've changed. That was the idea. A week later, the invitations multiplied. The clip passed 1 million views, then 2. Bookers offered panels with names I used to hear through walls while she laughed in other rooms. I accepted the ones aligned with my message and declined the ones that wanted scandal. Hype corrodes the voice. I wouldn't let it touch mine. The distance between us became a geography. We coexisted with polite sentences and carefully limited questions. She still met friends, chased the shimmer of crowded tables, gathered stories like souvenirs. I noticed the new perfume, the unfamiliar jacket draped over a chair one night, the late returns with a softness in her smile that had nothing to do with me. I noticed, but I didn't ask. I had already learned what I needed to know the night she introduced me as a roommate in everything but rent. Clarity arrives like cold air. I opened a new document called Plan, not because I was a strategist by nature, but because the next phase required clean steps. I consulted a lawyer a former colleague recommended, kind, steady, the sort of person who explains complicated processes in human language. We spoke about property, about accounts, about keeping things amicable and firm. We designed timelines and contingencies like adults, not characters in a shouting match. No slammed doors, no public scenes, no online cryptograms. I stayed present while I prepared. That was important, not to vanish into the fantasy of a better self while neglecting the practical. I cooked dinner, watered plants, paid bills, returned library books, and marked each small task with a quiet sense of stewardship. My life was not a vehicle to anywhere else anymore. It was a room I cleaned because I lived in it. Then came the message I had predicted and dreaded in equal measure. It was from one of Maya's co-workers, an acquaintance who used to laugh a little too hard at her jokes. He sent me a warning, the sort that begins with, "I'm not trying to stir trouble," and continues anyway. He'd seen her at a rooftop bar with her manager, the same man who loved to call every person rock star, while delegating his praise like a currency. The co-worker mentioned a hand on a waist, a kiss that wasn't a greeting, a shared ride home. He ended with, "Sorry, man." I closed my eyes, inhaled, exhaled, and felt, not anger, not grief, exactly. What I felt was confirmation. A chord had been struck months ago. This was just the echo. That night, I didn't confront her. I didn't lay out screenshots, dates, times. I didn't ask for explanations that would only bend truth around ego. I told her I'd be traveling for a conference across the state. She nodded, barely listening, too absorbed in her screen to ask specifics. The next morning, I packed a small bag, kissed the top of her head like a neighbor, and left. I didn't go to a conference. I rented a quiet room above an independent bookstore, the kind where time smells like pages. The owner gave me a key and a smile that said, "You can be lonely here without being alone." I shut off notifications and wrote. Not a confession, not a tell-all, not a script designed to ruin anyone. I wrote a talk about character, the kind you choose when nobody claps. I poured in the nights I'd held my tongue, the mornings I'd built myself from discipline, the middle hours where silence taught me how to listen for honest signals. I built the talk around a single idea. Dignity does not announce itself. It walks, and walking is louder than shouting if you listen. When I came home 3 days later, Maya had filled the apartment with flowers. Most were from her friends. One looked like an apology from the man who used to overpraise people to keep them hungry. She had placed the blooms across the kitchen counter, perhaps to make the room feel new again. "You were gone," she said. I told you. She picked up a card and put it down without reading it. I keep thinking about that night. The standing. How they stood for you. She took a breath. I'm proud of you, Jake. Thank you, I said again. The words could exist without attaching to anything else. The charity gala invitation I had accepted months before arrived with details. It would be elegant, well-attended, and filmed. The theme, second chances. My talk on character belonged there. The organizer asked if I'd close the evening with a short story, something true, something that could leave people feeling braver about their own quiet choices. I agreed. The calendar placed the gala 6 months to the day since the wine table joke that had started everything. I didn't tell Maya the date. I didn't hide it either. My schedule was on the office corkboard, the one she never looked at because it didn't glow. A friend mentioned the gala online. She saw the post 2 days before and casually asked, "So that's this weekend?" "Yes," I said. "I'll be on last." "I might come," she replied, then pretended it wasn't a request. The night of the gala, the venue glowed like it had been polished by sunlight. People moved through the lobby with the purposeful grace events like this require. All lacquered poise and genuine generosity, trying to share a body. I took my place backstage, mic clipped, notes folded but not needed. The host who'd invited me clasped my shoulder. "End us with something that makes us walk slower to our cars," he said. "Something that stops people from checking their phones at the traffic light." I stepped into the lights, calm as a winter lake. I didn't speak about betrayal. I spoke about mislabeling. How people mistake steadiness for dullness, kindness for lack of edge, humility for absence of ambition. I spoke about what grows underground while others chase surface shimmer. I told a story about a man who learned that silence is not the absence of power, but a chamber where power learns how to breathe. I didn't name her, didn't hint at titles or workplaces, didn't deliver any blow designed to humiliate. I let the crowd feel the ache of someone being made into a punchline and the way that person decided to build a life that wouldn't fit inside anyone's joke. When I finished, the room rose like ocean to moon. As the sound receded, I saw her. Middle aisle again, hands parted like they'd forgotten how to meet. Her face was not crumpled or furious. It was something else. Recognition, maybe. Or the feeling that arrives when a mirror finally shows you the angle you've been avoiding. She wasn't speechless for my benefit. She simply didn't have words that would push the moment back into the shape she wanted. Backstage, I sipped water and thanked the volunteers. My mentor, in a tuxedo that somehow made him look more like himself, hugged me and asked nothing. That was his gift. He knew which questions would cheapen a threshold. Maya waited near the exit. "Can we talk?" she asked. Her voice was small in a way I hadn't heard since the first year, before performance swallowed sincerity. "We can," I said. We walked a block, then another, until the noise thinned. She started with the easy sentences: pride, admiration, regret for careless words. The hard ones followed slower, as if walking through mud. She admitted the rooftop, the car, the weeks of late-night messages that she'd justified as harmless, because she never named them. I listened without interruption because the outcome no longer depended on whether I believed her version. My life had stopped orbiting her opinion of me. It had its own gravity now. "I can fix this," she said. "I can change. I want to be the person who claps for you because she knows how hard you worked, not the person who needs to dim a room to glow." I believed that she believed it in that moment under street lamps. Belief is not a contract, though. It is a weather pattern. I reached into my coat and handed her an envelope. Inside, the agreement my lawyer and I had crafted waited with calm print and clear numbers. No gut punches, no traps. Fair division, practical timelines, a note about the couch she loved and the books I'd keep. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm releasing both of us. I'm not a roommate who hates parties. I'm a person who learned how to hold a room and then realized he didn't want to share a home with someone who only looks at him when other people are looking too." Tears pressed at the corners of her eyes. She nodded, then nodded again, as if convincing her neck to understand what her mind already did. "You're really done." "I finished the version of us that relied on you finding me entertaining," I said. "There's a different version available to both of us. It doesn't include cruelty dressed as wit." She traced the edge of the envelope. "What will you tell people?" The truth they can handle, I said. That our paths change shape, that I'm grateful for the lessons I kept and not obligated to carry anymore. We walked back. At the door, she asked if I would do her one kindness, not to share the worst parts of the story. I told her I hadn't and wouldn't, not because she deserved protection, though perhaps she did, but because I did. I didn't build my voice to use it like a weapon. The point had never been to hurt her. It had been to stop letting myself be a target. The weeks that followed were mundane in the way that real endings are. Papers, keys, boxes, a label maker I bought because I found the order soothing. Friends texted variations of, "Are you okay?" I said yes and meant it. Some tried to feed me stories about her missteps to make me feel vindicated. I thanked them and changed the subject. The revenge had already landed in the only place it could change me, my choices. When I moved into a smaller place with worn wood floors and a balcony barely wide enough for a chair, I felt lighter than I had in any apartment with more square footage. I set a single plant by the window and watched it figure out where the sun lived. I spoke at schools about dignity, at shelters about rebuilding after quiet collapses, at corporate breakfasts about leadership that doesn't require a roar to be heard. People sent letters about small changes, apologies delivered without performative tears, boundaries finally drawn, dinners reclaimed from mockery disguised as cleverness. One afternoon, an envelope arrived without a return address. Inside was a program from a community showcase for new speakers. A note written in a hand I recognized instantly sat beneath it. "You were right about the quiet. I'm learning to listen to mine. Thank you for not using your microphone to make me small." I put the note in a drawer. Not as a trophy, not as a relic, but as proof that even when we part, the way we leave can teach. My mentor's words felt wider now. Revenge that burns hot leaves ash. Mine had been cool, patient, shaped like a stage and a signature. It left a path rather than a scorch mark. Months later, at a conference on resilience, a moderator asked me during the Q&A what moment made the biggest difference. Everyone assumes it's the standing ovation, the clip, the offers. I told them the truth. It was the morning after, when she handed me coffee and I said thank you without folding myself into a version she could comfortably dismiss. It was the day I stopped waiting for permission to be a person who takes up honest space. After the session, a young man with nervous hands approached. "My partner calls me predictable," he said, voice shaking. "Says it like an insult. I thought maybe I should be louder, or riskier, or wilder. But maybe I should be more deliberate." "Predictable can mean reliable," I said. "Reliable can be generous. Make brave choices in quiet ways. Let your life be the proof." He smiled a little, like a person who had just found a place to stand that didn't wobble. I watched him walk away and realized I had never been boring. I had been building a rhythm other people couldn't hear yet. Once I learned to set the beat, the room followed. 6 months earlier, she had mocked me in front of friends and called it humor. 6 months later, I was the one leaving rooms quiet for the right reasons. Not because I silenced anyone, but because I had finally learned how to speak with a voice that didn't need to bruise to be felt. That was the only revenge that mattered. And it turned out not to be revenge at all, but a return to myself, to breath I didn't rush, to the life I had wanted when I mistook calm for smallness. On stage, under lights that now felt like natural weather, I closed my next talk with a line that never failed to land. Some people will measure you by your noise because that's all they've learned to hear. Teach them another music, and if they refuse to listen, keep playing anyway. Eventually, someone will hear it and learn the steps. And if nobody does, you will still have danced. Months after the gala, my life had settled into something I never imagined during those nights of silent endurance. The apartment was smaller, the crowd sometimes larger, but the balance was mine. I no longer carried the weight of someone else's judgment. Instead, I carried the lessons of patience, practice, and quiet strength that had carried me through. Maya and I finalized the separation without fireworks. She moved into a new place, her life drifting back to familiar circles. Now and then, I'd hear about her through mutual friends, always framed in fragments. She seemed softer, less eager to play the star in every room. Maybe she had learned something from the silence she once mocked, or maybe she was simply finding her own way. Either way, it wasn't my story to track anymore. My path stretched forward in stages and speeches. Each audience reminded me that words could build, not just wound. Invitations grew, and with them, responsibility. I became careful, intentional, using my voice to help others who'd been underestimated, dismissed, or labeled too boring by people too blind to see the depth beneath calm waters. One evening, after finishing a keynote in a city I had once only dreamed of visiting, I stood on the balcony of my hotel, looking out at the skyline. The applause still echoed in my ears, but what mattered wasn't the noise. It was the stillness afterward, the knowledge that I had rebuilt myself without cruelty, without needing to destroy anyone else to stand tall. I thought back to that dinner table 6 months earlier, the laughter at my expense, and realized it no longer hurt. The wound had become a map. Every step I'd taken since had led me here, to a life built not on revenge, but on reclaiming my voice. And the sweetest part? She once left me speechless in front of friends. Now I left entire rooms in silence, because they were listening.